What's going on, y'all? Back again with another video. This time, we're going to be talking about the manga Aku no Hana. It's low key. It has a good rating on my anime list. I believe it's like an 8.3. So basically, the focus on this one is going to be an analysis of Nanako Saeki. And in particular, we're going to be doing a deep dive on how she shaped Takao's character and what she represented to him. And just kind of overall, like the way she was used in the stories of the manga. Now, if you have not read the manga or watched the anime, this is your spoiler warning because I will be going into spoilers throughout this video. So if you haven't done so, please turn the video off, go read the manga or watch the anime, and then come back. Also, I've only read the manga at this point, so this analysis will solely be focused on what happens in the manga. Okay, so we're gonna begin this analysis with what Saeki represented to Takao in the manga. To Takao, Saeki represented a link to polite society, or a better way to put it, she is his better angels, the voice that speaks to the part of his consciousness that wants to be a better person, that wants to strive for a certain level of excellence. So basically, Saeki's pretty, gets good grades, very popular. Even in the beginning, I believe she got like a 98 out of 100 in the first exam, and then Takao was somewhere like smack dab in the middle, and then Nakamura was 0. So that kind of lets you know like how on the extremes the writer put these characters, and just basically essentially Takao, in a way, I guess that 52 means at that moment he was at the halfway point, but leaning towards striving towards his better angels, which would be Saeki, which to me is the embodiment of polite society, of conformity, and just, you know, becoming a proper adult in this world. For these reasons, Saeki becomes his muse, or his femme fatale, as he calls it, right? Like, he starts to obsess over her. And this is like a really common theme, because with each of the 3 female characters, eventually at some point that these females become his muse and his focus. And in the beginning, it kind of seems like a lustful energy, but it's really not. It's almost like these females become a vehicle of the path he wants to chart forward in his life. And without them, it's almost as if he's lost. And so, because Saeki is literally the embodiment of human perfection or excellence or whatever, he is enthralled with her. And like as stated before, he just gets so linearly focused on her and cannot see her beyond or outside of that light. And this becomes a repeated point of contention from virtually, I would say, 2 fronts, because as him and Saeki grow closer, Nakamura wants to drag Takao more towards nihilism, the darkness, away from society, you know, towards chaos, destruction. And he tries to fight that, and on multiple occasions he says, no, I don't want to do that, because I want to be a proper person for Saeki, right? Saeki is the guiding principle, and like he cannot see beyond her, right? But slowly but surely, Nakamura is trying to, as she calls it, peel off his clothes. And I believe what Nakamura means by this is to get him down to giving into his deepest desires, to not stifling, to stop him from pushing his own personal wants and needs down to appear proper for society. So to give in to his urges. And I guess this battle comes up in the most clearest possible way in his urge to, I guess, objectify Saeki, to kind of see her in a sexual way, where he fights this constantly, and he says she's not like that. And anybody who talks about her like that, like where his friends like, oh, you know, girls are hairy down there, or when Nakamura says, oh, you know, Saeki really wants you to sleep with her, you know, and he just immediately says, no way, not possible, Saeki's above that, she is perfection, she's a 98 out of 100. Like, the things that you're talking about is for the trash. That's not what Saeki would want. And so basically, throughout the manga, this at least in the beginning parts of the manga, this was a first order issue for Takao, which led to a second order issue, which was suppressing his wants and needs to be the person that he felt Saeki wanted him to be, or that he should be for her, right? Created an unrealistic amount of pressure on him that he really struggled with. That every time that he was even around Saeki, no matter how calm she was, no matter how many times she tried to kind of get him to relax, he was on edge. Until everything just kind of comes down and breaks him down. So basically, he had like Saeki is kind of hurt. She saw him with Nakamura in the background, and I guess they were talking about sex or whatever. And then they get together, and she basically says, "Hey, look," and she asks him straight up, "Is there anything that you're hiding from me?" Right? So basically, it's like she's, in a way, Saeki's doing what Nakamura's doing. She's like, "Show me who you really are." That's the same thing Nakamura's like, "Show me who you really are." Right? Like, drop the ideal. Like Saeki's tired of trying to be perfect, and she likes him because she sees that he kind of embraces his imperfections in a way that she can't, right? And Nakamura, as we all know, is just crazy, right? Obviously, So the combination of these two. So in this moment, it's like undress yourself, and then in that moment where he felt that at least he thought he was living up to the standard, and that he thought he was doing what he needed to do. And in this moment, it became real to him that he can't live up to that. That at the end of the day, he's just a coward. And when faced with pressure or an obstacle or just something difficult, he always takes the easiest route and he runs. And so he just lies to her. And then in this moment, the guilt just comes in waves, and he runs to Nakamura. And he breaks down, and he's like, "Oh, I'm a worm. And she's like, "Yeah, you definitely are." Right? And he's like, "Oh, expose me. Please expose me." And to me, this is the moment where Saeki stops being his muse. Where this is in a way where he's saying, "I no longer want to wear this mask." This makes Nakamura happy because she sees that Takao is finally in a mental space that he is ready to undress himself in front of the world to show what she calls his true inner pervert, which then leads us to probably one of the best scenes in the manga, which is the vandalism of the classroom. This scene is essentially an initiation, a rite of passage for Takao. It's essentially symbolic of just like the undressing, right? The taking off your clothes, like just letting it all hang out and showing the world who you are. And as soon as they get there, Takao thought he was ready, but he breaks down. He says, "No, I just want to," and you can see the inner war, the tug of war that's going on in spirit, because he goes, "I just want to be a perfect person for Saeki." So Saeki's still pulling him towards the ideal, even though it's been too much for him and he's finally broken down. But now the ideal that Nakamura has for him, right, just to fall deep into nihilism, that's breaking him down even further. And so he's frozen with indecision. Like he can't make a decision. And then Nakamura just calmly says, "I'm disappointed," and walks out. And in that moment, he runs up to the board, writes his name and all the sins that he's committed up to this point, and they just go crazy in that classroom. And in that moment, in this room, by taking that action, Saeki stopped being his muse. She could no longer be his muse. It was no longer an option, right? Like, by doing this, by showing the world who he is, he could never be the ideal human that he feels that Saeki deserves, or at least that he can't live to this the artificial image that he's created in his mind of Saeki. And so after everybody finds out, right, it turns out that Nakamura helped hide his name, and so no one really knew. But Saeki still ended up finding out because of the book, right, the flower or something, the Flowers of Evil book. And so she came and said, "Oh, I know it was you." And she said, "I don't care. and she's still interested. Like she's still showing him, like, just show me you. And as a matter of fact, I think after seeing all that, she liked him even more, because it's, in a way, she liked it and it hurt her, because she liked it because she got to see more of him, this person that she's fascinated with, while at the same time it hurt her because this was done with Nakamura, and she's thinking, why Nakamura and not me? And it drove her crazy. But in doing, and by the act of writing his name on that board and walking out that room and thinking that the whole world was going to see it, mentally he's already checked out of being a normal citizen of society. Just living out a regular life. Like he's kind of given up on that mentally. He's checked out. It's done. It doesn't even matter that she doesn't care. Like he can't see her in any other way other than the ideal he set her up to be. And so by relating with her still, it's almost like coming back to society. And it's like still trying to live up to those ideals, but he's thrown that out. He's thrown it to the trash. He's accepted the worst parts of himself as who he is. He no longer sees the balance that he was kind of trying to straddle at one point in his life, right? Like that's gone. That's dead. And it's even worse now that and now he's exposed to Saeki, and I believe his mom found the clothes, so she knew that he vandalized the room. And so at this point, in his crazy child head, he's like, well, the whole world knows, and it's in a way that is true. The whole world knows now. So it's like now he's just jumping. So he's rejecting all of it, and it's just him and Nakamura versus the world. They're going to the other side. And so in the end, no matter how hard and how passionately Saeki would pursue Takao, it would no longer work, because at this point, rejecting her was Takao rejecting society. He's given up on approximating any level of normality and is going headfirst into his nihilistic tendencies. Throughout the first part of the manga, Takao and Nakamura was always talking about this place that they're going to go to, which is called the other side. And they always talked about it, how they're going to run away from all the sheep and, the losers in society that can't see what they can see. And they're going to go to the other side, just them. And so Saeki was aware of this other side that they were talking about, but she never really understood it. So in chapter 29, she explicitly asked him, hey, what is this? Like, what are you guys trying to do? And then Takao explains it and gives her a reason. And in a way, she kind of cuts through his BS and just says, look, just turn yourself in. And the thought scares him, right? Like, facing the consequences for his actions. He's saying, just tell everybody. In a way, she's telling him to do the same thing that Nakamura did, but in a different way. Whereas Nakamura just wanted to let his deviancy out, but they wouldn't let the world know, really. They were just doing it in front of each other. It was to please each other. It was kind of to build out their own community. Whereas Saeki is saying, look, own what you did. In a way, she sees through him, and she says it you misunderstood me and I misunderstood you. And she's starting to understand him a little better. And she says, I see that you're scared. And I think what drilled that home is when she hugged Nakamura and Nakamura was shaking. And it was the first time that, rather than seeing Nakamura as this image of this person who just doesn't care about anything and nothing matters, in that moment, she realized this is a human being that can also be hurt. That Nakamura is no different than her. Yeah, there's different variations of people, but at the end of the day, when you cut it down to the middle, you're all the same, right? And she says that herself. Quote, nothing is ever that clear cut. Nothing can become special. Everyone's the same. Most everything is just a matter of impression. Is it so special that you're perfect? Even that is just subjective. That's why you can't get to the other side. End quote. I believe what she's trying to say here is that this other side is just a delusion that they've created in their head to justify their running. So basically what she's saying is look, all three of them had existential problems that they were dealing with that led them to seriously erratic behavior. And while Takao and Nakamura use this other side as a pretty metaphorical euphemism or place that makes them feel good and gives them something to look forward to as they run. What she's saying, and also it allows them to feel better than others around them, like they're seeing something that other people can't. What she's saying, what you're seeing is just a lie, right? All you're doing is running, right? That's it. Like, you guys are no different than me. Like it's like you look down on me and you think it's, and you dismiss how I feel and my, like, the things that I'm thinking and going through and my questions as just trivial and stupid for society. But really, you don't want to face my questions or how I feel, because that means you have to face a problem, face an obstacle, but you keep running, right? And she cuts through it and just says, you know what? Just turn yourself in, right? And it's interesting because even earlier in the story, when Takao was snapping, every time he goes to Nakamura and he starts hitting that edge and he gets closer and closer to the nihilism before the vandalism where he went off the deep end. Like, every time it was always a feeling of, oh my God, I just got caught. My mom just found out, or Saeki just found out something, or someone else just caught me doing something. And he runs and he never faces the issue head on. And in many ways, Nakamura is the same way, right? Because she's running from her home, running from her father, running from her school, and then, just running from society. Whereas Saeki is actually really different from them in that every time she met an obstacle, she went at it head on. Like, despite how plain Jane that they call her and they talk down on her for, just being a part of society or whatever it is, when she felt Takao pulling away, for a second she ran. She tried to hide. Her friend Ai kind of had to push and try and keep it together, but eventually she snapped and she just said, no, I'm gonna do whatever it takes. Like, I'm ready to compete. She took it on straight up, and then even out of all three of them, she's the only person who went and undressed herself in front of the world to see, by showing herself as this perfect child who went in front of the police and said, I burned this place, I did that, I did this, and went and talked about all her past transgressions. And then she had another thing that she said, where she said, you can't go forwards and you can't go backwards, so you'd best turn yourself in. And in a way, I think that quote kind of just means, look, it is what it is. Just accept it. Stop. Essentially, she's saying, stop running. You can't run. Face your problems head on and deal with it. And deal with the repercussions that come with that. Simple. So, initially in the manga, Saeki was this abstract idea of what it means to be a ideal person in society, like the perfection personified, like how a human should operate in the confines of society, right? So, and her character itself never really vocalized this, but she embodied it in her perfection, her grades, her beauty, just doing what she's supposed to do, and that drew Takao in. And earlier this was fine because Takao was at least trying to meet that standard, right? But now that standard was too much. It was too overbearing for him, and he ran away. And then as he ran away, Saeki chased him. Right? It's like he couldn't escape the pull of society, but he's finally he crossed the Rubicon, right? Like the point of no return, with the vandalism of the school and just the stealing the girls' pennies at his school, and so now he's too far gone, as he thinks, right? And so he feels like he's escaped, but still he can't run away from Saeki. So by coming to the house, now she's gotten to know Takao, and now what was once abstract is becoming more concrete. Like, her character is becoming more concrete, and it's not totally concrete, but you can see that it's morphing, and that now she's vocalizing the angst that is within Takao, his fear, and what he's really trying to do. Basically, just calling him out, not too hard, right? Not too harshly, because she's not there yet. She gets there, in part 2 of the manga after the time skip. So after the time skip, Saeki and Takao are now juniors or seniors in high school, and they run into each other while randomly, like while on a date. They hadn't seen each other in years, so they exchange information, and they decide to meet up at what I believe to be a coffee shop, so that they can catch up and see what's been going on with them over the years. So, like I said before, Saeki's character was, in many ways, the embodiment of the society's ideals and judgment for Takao. And at first she started out as abstract, and as time went on she was evolving and becoming more concrete, right? But on this meeting she became like steel. Like she turned into like a sword that was cutting through all the bullshit of Takao, separating the lies from the truth, and not even for one moment giving him any inch to blur the lines between the two. So she begins this process by asking 3 fundamental questions, each of which that Takao has been running away from and totally and completely refusing to face. The 3 questions that Saeki asked Takao were: 1, what happened to Nakamura? 2, what were the details about the suicide attempt? 3, who is Tokiwa to you? Takao's response to the first 2 questions of what happened to Nakamura and the suicide attempt were met with I don't knows, or blank stares. Then after Takao would give this response, Saeki would not let up. She would immediately follow each of these questions with why don't you know? And whenever met with the follow-up questions, Takao would be shook, like just totally shocked to his core, like just speechless. And and then the bigger part too, whenever she would ask why, she would look him directly in his eyes. And while Saeki's looking directly in his eyes, Takao would always lay down. Like it's like he could never look. Like if he can't physically run, then he runs mentally. Like he escapes by just not looking at you, not responding, not talking. And it's almost like he's thinking like, if I just don't say something, maybe this will all disappear. But Saeki sees through his bullshit, and she doesn't relent. After asking the second question about what happened with the suicide attempt, Takao does his usual routine of the I don't know, just a quiet, non-response. Then she followed this question up with why did she push you away? In this moment, Takao was shook. He looked down, averted his eyes towards the ground, while she asked this question looking dead in his eyes. As this is all going on, Takao is completely quiet. Saeki sees this, and she says jokingly, "You don't know?" And she just laughs right in his face. It's clear the pressure is getting to Takao. So at this point, he decides to change the subject and goes on a long sort of soliloquy. I don't want to say long, but he kind of goes on a tangent about how Saeki was right about how there was no going forward or going back, right? That generally, like, everything's the same. That even though he's in a new area, it's still the same. But he says what has changed is that he no longer has a death wish. And I guess that's a way of saying, like, look, I'm kind of in a better space now, possibly. I think I could be interpreting that wrong. But Saeki ignores Takao's comment entirely, doesn't even acknowledge it, as if to say he's still lying. She sees it for what it is. She knows that this is just a way for him to run away. It's just an avoidance tactic. The same exact tactics that he used all those years ago whenever she tried to reach him back then. But this time he has nowhere to run to. He can't run to Nakamura. Why? Because now, today, he's running from Nakamura. So he's stuck and he has to face Saeki, who essentially is the proxy for the positive half of his consciousness, whereas Nakamura was a proxy for the negative half of his consciousness, or the nihilistic half of his consciousness, which had been, shrouding him from listening to the positive. But now that half is gone, he has to listen loud and clear. And so the way Saeki ignored him was to ask the third fundamental question, which was, who is Tokiwa to you? Even deeper than that, what she asks is she a substitute for Nakamura? Because she actually looks pretty similar to Nakamura in many ways. And so his answer was, she is not. So Saeki's reply to that is, if she's not a substitute, then what is she to you? Now, before I get to how he responded to that, I want to make a note of, what you can clearly see here is that almost every other time that he was met with a question, he answered, I don't know, or he looked away, or just he tried to avoid it altogether. But finally, by the third time, after after Saeki has shown that she will not move and he's realized there's nowhere to run, he finally hits her with direct answers. He's finally saying something, but he still refuses to look at her. But what this to me symbolizes is that he's getting closer to the truth. He's getting closer to the core of the question that he needs to answer. And Saeki is bringing him to that solution, slowly but surely. So getting back to the question, his reply to what Tokiwa is to him was that he's interested in her novel, that he likes her novel, and that her novel has given him a reason to move forward. And then, without a second's thought, Saeki instantly says, liar. She follows this up by saying Takao will only use Tokiwa as a tool for comfort, to hide from his true feelings, which is he's running away from Nakamura, that he can't face it. And Tokiwa is essentially a substitute, and everything that he said up until this point is just a lie, so that he doesn't have to acknowledge that truth. And in many ways, this novel that he's speaking of just sounds like the other side, right? The same thing. And even when he explained the novel, Saeki asked confusing, novel? In the same way she was asking other side, it's just what is this that you're talking about? And so in a way she's just looking at it, she's just listening to him, and it's just almost like nothing's changed since then. He's doing the same thing. It's literally all the same thing, except just new tools and new people, just substitutes for what was old. Therefore, Tokiwa is a substitute for Nakamura, and the novel is a substitute for the other side. At this point, Takao has had enough of being judged. He couldn't take it anymore, so he slams his fist on the table in anger and screams, "It's not like that." So now Takao is visibly shaken. Saeki sees this, and she sees his reaction, and she smiles. But this smile, I don't think is to say laughing at him, as much as I believe it's a smile of happiness. At least that's how I interpret it, because I think she's happy that finally you're facing it. Finally, you're not running from it. We're finally at the core of the problem, and she sees the reaction, and that reaction is almost his anger is almost an acknowledgement that what she's saying is true, and that he knows it deep down, and that's why he's reacting like that. So in many ways, the scene is similar to when Takao had ran out of Saeki's room in shame earlier in part 1, when she told him to tell him the truth and about everything, and he lied to her, and he ran out in shame and ran to Nakamura and just broke down and said, I'm pathetic, I'm a pervert, I'm this, yada yada yada, and just show me the way or something, right? And then in that scenario also, when he broke down and said all the things that he had said, all the truth, he'd confronted his the demons inside, and he's kind of starting to accept it, right? And in that one, Nakamura smiled also, kind of like Saeki and did in this scene, and Nakamura just smiles because she's happy, he's accepting it, right? He's come to terms with what she already saw in him. So in part 1, when Nakamura saw that he had came to terms with his inner quote-unquote pervert, right, she instructed him to vandalize the school, right? That was the initiation process. So now to bring that towards now, right, to where Saeki and Takao are right now in part 2, and up the conversation that they've been having in the coffee shop up to this point, Saeki had been operating from a place above Takao, right? Just probing, and just constantly judging. But once she realized that finally he's ready, he's come to terms mentally with the things that he's been running away from, her demeanor changes. She relaxes her demeanor. She comes off as a bit more compassionate. She's still discerning, but now she kind of comes down, right? And it's less hostile, and it's more of a, okay, now I can finally talk to you. After Takao screams, "It's not like that," Saeki gently lays her hands over Takeo's fist. She then proceeds to say, quote, "It'll be like that. After all, she isn't Nakamura-san. Don't you care about the real Nakamura-san anymore? You have always avoided that day, me, that town, and also Nakamura-san. For all your life, you'll run away like that. Isn't that right? That's how it is. I knew that, but I'm disappointed." End quote. So there's a lot to unpack in that quote. So Saeki begins with a level of compassion, saying, "Look, I care. I really do care. I'm not here to be mean. Like, I'm doing this because I cared about you, right?" And she follows this with the direct question of, "Don't you care about Nakamura-san?" As if to say, I'm doing this because I care about you. So why don't you do the same for Nakamura? Like, there should have been closure. You should go get that as I'm getting it with you, right? Like, as I chased you, you chased Nakamura. So what are you doing? Why are you just giving up? Because remember, in the beginning, in part 1, after Takao had broken off with Saeki, she did exactly what Takeo's doing right now, right? She just kind of said, whatever, like, it's okay, Takao. If you want to leave, leave. I don't need the closure. It's fine. But eventually she would build up the courage of her convictions and go out and seek Takao full throttle to get the closure she needs and to just see what the hell went wrong. Whereas she's looking at this and she's like, why aren't you doing the same? Why don't you go press for the closure? Why are you content with not knowing why she pushed you off during your suicide attempt? Why don't you want to know what happened to Nakamura? Don't you care? Then she proceeds to calmly break down everything that he's been running away from. Nakamura, his old town, his friends, just everything, right? And she says that you've been doing this all your life and you're going to keep doing it. As if to say, until you face Nakamura, you're only going to hurt anyone in your future, that future being Tokiwa. Then her last quote is really telling, right? Where she says, I always knew this, but I'm disappointed. And that in a way is to say, I cared about you and I had high hopes for you, even though I knew the truth about you. But to see it come to fruition, it makes me sad. After giving her final judgment of Takao, she looks, gets up, says thanks, and leaves. And Takao just has his head down because he has to take all these things in, because now he knows it's true, he feels it's true, and he can no longer run away from it. And so when Takao came to terms with his nihilism, right, and his quote-unquote perversion, in that moment, Nakamura said, look, the initiation step is to vandalize a school, right? And in this moment, when he comes to terms with all the things that he's running away from, Saeki essentially told him, your initiation to really deal and cope with everything is to meet up with Nakamura. Get closure. Simple. And then as Takao takes all this in, and now that he's contending with all these things, he gets an image of Nakamura from the day they tried to commit suicide with the fire. And it says, it's her holding the lighter, and after she pushed him away, and she says, I'll go alone. And Takao lets it all out. He just bawls like a baby. He's just crying at that table. And it essentially, this is, he's come to terms. I mean, I know I said that a lot, but this is his revolution, and he's ready, and he's gonna do what he has to do. And obviously, we know what happens in the future. He meets up with Nakamura, and they have their conversation with Tokiwa, and he was able to come to grips with his past and move on with his life finally. And that's where I conclude my analysis. Thank you for watching. Thank you for staying throughout the whole video, and I hope you guys watch the rest of my videos. All right, peace.